Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Monday, May 2nd. I hope everybody had a great weekend. We are back from InnoTech Austin. That happened last week. What a great event we had. We live streamed from it. I hope you were able to catch one or two of the sessions there. But for today's Techstrong TV, we have an amazing lineup of conversations. We get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Tanmay Gopal, who is the co-founder and CEO of Hasura. Hasura has new data federation innovations that are enabling fast and secure data access among both GraphQL and non-GraphQL data sources. And that is all without custom code, which actually really does accelerate application development. So Tanmay and Alan talk about the new technology and what it means for developers. Good stuff. After that, Alan speaks with Alicia Viznik, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called YLabs. YLabs is an AI observability platform that is built to enable every enterprise to run AI with certainty. That's a bold statement. Alan and Alicia discuss machine learning model observability and why model failure is hindering machine learning development. This is a great conversation. Really does offer some food for thought. If your organization is working deeper in machine learning and artificial intelligence, you definitely want to check this one out. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Secure Software Summit event. It was a virtual event that happened in January. This is a presentation by Shannon Leitz, who is the VP of Vulnerability Labs at Adobe. And she has a presentation titled How to Achieve DevSecOps Maturity. Certainly a topic that a lot of organizations are very interested these days, especially with the number of applications that are vulnerable and the number of data breaches that have occurred because of vulnerabilities in code, and so many more organizations are looking to lock down their applications so much more earlier in the development process. So Shannon walks us through how to achieve that level of maturity with DevSecOps that organizations so desperately need. It's a great presentation. After that, I am back with the news headlines, and then I have a great conversation with Jason Lengstorf, who is the VP of Developer Experience over at Netlify. Jason and I talk about the developer shortage, which is a thing, but he believes it's not due to a lack of developers, but to a lack of support. So we discuss ways in which organizations can create that developer-centric environment to keep their developers happy and their ranks high. Good stuff there. After that, I've got the webinars preview for you. And then Mitch Ashley is here, and he has a conversation with Jatil Damania, who is the VP of Delivery at Contino. And they discuss how cloud enables new business models with real customer outcomes, as well as how to partner with contemporary cloud service partners. Easy for me to say, right? But it's a great conversation about the cloud, and cloud is so pervasive these days in so many business models. This is another way of making sure that it really does what your organization needs to do. So it's a great conversation. Then we round things out with The View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard speaks with Wes Wells, who is a product manager at Instant Connect, and Mark Hermeling, who is the vice president of Global Solutions Engineering at Grammatech. They discuss how to dynamically generate a software bill of materials. Another very, very relevant conversation, certainly can piggyback off of Shannon Leitz's presentation from the Secure Software Summit and DevSecOps. But this is a great conversation between Mike and Wes and Mark. Great stuff there. All right, that is a fantastic lineup we have for you, and we are going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. Kicking things off today is a conversation between Alan and Tanmay Gopal, who is the co-founder and CEO of Hasura. They talk about Hasura's new data federations innovation that enable fast and secure data access among both GraphQL and non-GraphQL data sources without custom code. It is a great technology and a great conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel, and we're here on another Techstrong TV interview. My guest for this interview is a first-timer here on Techstrong. He is the co-founder and CEO of Hasura. We're going to find out all about it in a second. Let me introduce you to Tanmay Gopal. Tanmay, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey Alan, hey everybody, thanks for having me.
Thanks. It's great for you to join us. So, Tanmay, Hasura, for those who don't know, I'll give a little bit, but I'm going to ask you to really do the heavy lifting. But Hasura is the first Indian-based, subcontinent-based, open source unicorn. And look, a unicorn today isn't what a unicorn was 4 or 5 years ago, of course, right? But nevertheless, it's quite an accomplishment. Congratulations. But beyond that, I'm going to guess our audience is fairly technical. They might have heard of Hasura, probably did, but they may have heard of it and may not be clear what it is. Why don't you, if we don't mind, Tanmay, why don't we start there?
Perfect. No, that sounds great. So Hasura is, our company kind of builds a core open source project and a managed cloud service on top of that, where the idea is that the product essentially helps you provide an instant GraphQL API on data sources that you have. So, if you have data sources that exist and you want your application developers to kind of be able to operate on that data or access that data easily, instead of you kind of manually building an API by hand and building a modern API like GraphQL, you can just set Hasura up. It runs as a container if you're running it yourself, or spin it up on a cloud service, point it to your data sources, connect them securely, do a little bit of configuration, right, with things like JSON or even via UI that we have, wire them up together and set up security rules. And Hasura gives you a GraphQL API that developers love integrating with, right? So people who are building web mobile applications or serverless functions or microservices or anything on the edge really that needs a nice API, it's kind of it's a boon for them, right? They can start moving really, really quickly. The nature of GraphQL itself and the automation that Hasura gives them. So that's the quick spiel on what the product does. Happy to kind of go into a little more detail to help folks understand, because GraphQL itself is pretty new too.
All right, let's do this though. I mentioned the unicorn, and of course that means $1 billion valuation. But there are other sort of metrics I think we could use that'll give people sort of a sense of the scale of adoption here for Hasura. You started in late 2017, 400 million plus downloads. There are some other metrics which are pretty mind-blowing as well. Why don't you share with us a bit?
Yeah, so we started the company in late 2017, and we open sourced the tech that we've been building in July 2018. When developers kind of fell in love with the product, and we went from like 2 million to 100 million to now 500 million downloads, and that's just been kind of amazing to see that traction and love from developers. Very engaged community, that's kind of been built over the last few years as well. See about 26,000 stars on GitHub, and one of the most active projects in the GraphQL space. So that's kind of just been amazing to see over the last few years. And I think with every open source project that's in the kind of infrastructure space, what becomes really important is mission critical adoption, right? Like, how many kind of workloads are we powering that are critical to the business? Because that then allows us to build a business around that as well, to kind of provide business value, right? And that's kind of grown really well too, right? Our users and customers include, like the world's largest insurance company, two of the world's largest financial services companies, the world's largest, two largest aviation companies, largest electric car company, right? Can't take too many names, but good spread of folks using Hasura for powering all kinds of applications and APIs that are pretty critical to their business. So that adoption has also just been absolutely amazing to see over the last few years.
Absolutely. And to just kind of lay the groundwork for what we want to talk a little bit more about today, which is a recent announcement. So Hasura raised about $100 million round or something like that just this past February, 2 months ago.
Yep.
And really, it's a platform, right? Everybody today wants to be a platform. Right? Every entrepreneur founder says, oh, no, we're not just an app, we're a platform. But in this case, Hasura truly is a platform in that it sits at a layer, right, as you mentioned, between the edge and the developer. And it's like a translation layer, if you will, that, through using an API, and you could write, developers or what have you, can write their API that allows a data source, whether it's a graph database or a non-graph database or a flat file or whatever, a data source for that data to be imported in, in through the app. And that border, if you will, is where the Hasura platform sits, and it makes the connection in and out, right, of that data.
Yep.
So that's where we are since 2017. Now, but today we have a new announcement around some increased functionality. Why don't jumping from there, tell us what this new announcement, this new feature set does.
Absolutely. So a big part of kind of Hasura, right, is this when we talk about the story of kind of data, you start to think about kind of data federation, or what's happening today is that when we think about developers who are building applications on the edge, when they are kind of interacting with data, and you think about where that data is and where that data is coming from, it's getting split into multiple data sources, right? So just exactly what you said, where it would be like, split across a bunch of relational stores, a time series store, right? A search store, right? And so you want to have data that's kind of spread across these places. The system of record, or the source of truth, is kind of spread across these. They're semantically related, right? So you kind of want a unified API, but that data is getting kind of spread, right? And so last year, Hasura used to support, we added support for being able to use multiple data sources simultaneously, right? So you can have a Postgres and a SQL Server and a BigQuery connected into Hasura, and Hasura will give you a unified API on these three things. What we've enhanced that capability with today, that we're going to be announcing, is the ability for any other GraphQL API to also be a source to Hasura. So just to kind of walk you through what that means, today you have SaaS vendors, right, like GitHub and Shopify and Contentful, who are also exposing a GraphQL API to developers, right? They used to have a REST API. They're also adding, and now they start maintaining a GraphQL API to support developers. So as other SaaS vendors start to provide a GraphQL API for their SaaS solution, or as GraphQL adoption within your organization increases, and maybe you have different teams providing GraphQL APIs to you, which is also kind of happening, right? The challenge that you now run into, right, is from enabling the developer. That developer needs a unified API across these GraphQL services, right? And that's kind of where Hasura comes in and says, hey, if you have these GraphQL services running, maybe they're vendor services like GitHub or Shopify or Contentful, right? Maybe they're built by your team. Maybe you've built something, right? Whatever it is. So what Hasura lets you do is easily compose them together into one unified API, right? You can easily kind of join across them and call them GraphQL joins. And that essentially lets you federate across these multiple GraphQL services easily. You don't have to contact the upstream vendor. You don't have to ask them to change anything. They don't have to change any code. They don't have to add any kind of specification that's proprietary or any change in configuration. They can just be exactly the GraphQL API that they are, and you can start putting them together. Hasura has this kind of metadata engine that lets you kind of compose these GraphQL services together, secure them, do caching, do tracing, all of the work that you need, and then give you that GraphQL API. So that's kind of the new capability that we've announced, the GraphQL joins. It lets you join data between two GraphQL services or between a GraphQL service and a database, right? And that's going to it's been something that our community has been asking us for a while, and that's going to be just amazing to see, the stuff that people build with it.
So let me just make sure I got it straight. So prior to this, using Hasura, a developer, an organization could have sort of a separate, discrete, distinct API going to a data source. And you could have another separate, distinct, discrete API going to another data source, and so on and so on. You could have multiple data sources, each with their own PI, each kind of in their own private Idaho, if you will, right? Each within their own
Correct.
world. Now, we can federate, I don't know if federate's the right word, but we can join all of these APIs into one superhighway, if you will, with multiple lanes. And this data from disparate sources is coming in, but it's all coming into the same place, really.
Exactly.
And so we're taking it in there.
Exactly.
And it's the difference between, a series of one-lane roads versus being on a highway.
Yes, exactly.
Makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. That's exactly it.
Got it. Okay.
And just given the amount of data that's just exploding in the world today, right? The number of the types of data, the amount of data, the number of APIs, it's becoming seriously challenging for people to kind of secure them and guarantee performance and SLAs and stuff around that, right? So for people to kind of keep being productive as this kind of complexity is increasing, that highway, that freeway, that merges all of these together becomes really important, right?
Agreed. Got it. Now, so is this new capability also part of the base open source Hasura platform, or is this kind of a freemium feature?
No, this is a part of the core open source platform as well.
That's fantastic. And it's available now, or?
Yep, we're just releasing it next week, the last week of April.
Okay, so it'll be available, let's say, by the last week in April. Well, by the time this plays, it'll actually be last week in April. So it is available now.
It is available now.
Any other sort of requirements to run this? Is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we run. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Give us an idea. What would that be?
So Hasura runs as a container. So if you're running the open source version or our self-hosted version, you essentially get a Docker image, and wherever you can run a Docker container, you can run Hasura. So, right, it's your internal it's your laptop, it's your cloud, it's your on-prem Kubernetes cluster, right? Wherever you can run a Docker container, you can run Hasura, as long as it has network access to connect to your data sources. So that's kind of where Hasura runs, and then Hasura gives you a control plane to help you configure Hasura, and then also Hasura becomes the data plane, the API itself that clients can connect to, right? So that kind of runs as a container, and there's some kind of developer experience tooling that runs as kind of web tools and stuff like that, or CLI tools to help you kind of run the control plane. And then on our managed cloud service, we run a managed cloud service today on AWS, a whole host of regions on AWS, and we've just launched Google Cloud Beta as well. So you can, what Hasura does is it kind of runs these containers for you, scales them up, manages kind of different types of workloads, etc. And we run that on our cloud service. And then, we can pair with data that's on your cloud. So for example, if you have data in AWS, Hasura Cloud on AWS will have kind of network peering with your data in AWS. Everything goes over the AWS backbone, and that way you don't have to manage Hasura. So you're kind of getting like this end-to-end managed experience, right? Your data is managed, your APIs are managed, your GraphQL API is managed, right? And then developers get productive. So that's now available on AWS and Google Cloud, and we'll add support for other cloud vendors over the coming quarters.
Excellent. Now, and that's also open source, so that's the enterprise,
so the managed cloud service, exactly. So the managed cloud version runs with certain enhancements to make operations easy. Yeah.
Just want to make sure it's clear to people, right? I don't want them to go and say, I thought this was, free too.
The way we think about it is,
someone's got to make a living here, right?
Yeah. The way we think about it is that for us, like when you think about kind of the philosophy of open source and how what goes into open source and what doesn't, right? Anything that affects the API for developers, right, goes into our open source engine, right? Because it's very important for developers today, especially when they're introducing something as critical as Hasura in their stack, that they don't get locked in, right? So you want to make sure that the API is open, right? Not only is it an open kind of GraphQL specification, right? So you can always kind of build your own, right, if you ever want to get rid of Hasura, but you can also switch between the open source version, the commercial versions, without having any changes in the API that you have, right? And that provides a lot of comfort and security to organizations and to developers, right? That their API is not going to change, right? Hasura is not going to come around one day and be like, nope, you're locked in, you can do nothing about it, right? So that's never something that we're going to do. It's the nature of kind of where Hasura is in the stack and what developers today and teams today want, necessitates that. So that's how we think about, what the open source version is. So for example, this particular feature that creates a unified API across different sources, it affects the API, right? It's a part of your API design. And so that's definitely, that's a part of our open source engine. When we think about operational enhancements, things that make it easy for you to run in production or to scale easily or to reduce kind of the overhead of like securing certain aspects of the API and stuff like that, those are kind of enhancements that we provide on a managed cloud service. It becomes easy for us to provide those enhancements as well. And that's kind of when you're thinking about, this is mission critical. I don't honestly want to do like maintain performance and reliability and security. I would rather just pay someone to take care of that for me. It's far more cost efficient for me to do that. And that's kind of how we think about the commercial side of the business.
Yeah, no, look, I'll be really honest. I've been involved in open source for many, many years. The idea of being able to offer a managed open source service or a hosted open source service made the whole open source business model viable, right? Prior to that, you had people who would say, oh, we'll offer training and support. It's not that that's bad. It's just hard to make that as your business. Yeah. Being able to offer this kind of thing, it makes it much easier to have an open source business model. Anyway, hey man, we're almost out of time. For people who want to get more information on Hasura, where do they go?
Hasura.io. That's the best place to go. Once you get there, you'll see links to our GitHub. You'll see links to our Discord community. And then, signing up on Hasura Cloud takes about 15-20 seconds, and spinning up your first Hasura project and connecting it to a data source. Trying out your first GraphQL API will take you all of 60 seconds. So, try that out. Man. We're super friendly. We love chatting with our community, with people who are trying GraphQL or Hasura for the first time. So, reach out to us.
Excellent. Tommy, thanks for being our guest here on Techstrong TV. Continued success with Hasura. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, Alan. Bye, everybody.
Come back. All right. Bye-bye now.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got a conversation between Alan and Alicia Viznik, who is the CEO and co-founder of YLabs. YLabs is an AI observability platform built to enable every enterprise to run AI with certainty. Good stuff there. So Alan and Alicia talk about machine learning model observability and why model failure is hindering ML development. Great topic. Very fascinating stuff. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview. I've got a first-time interviewer here on Techstrong TV, so let's welcome her to the show. Her name is Alicia Vishnik. Is that right, Alyssa?
Yes, it is. Hi, Alan.
Okay,
Great to be here.
Great to be here. Well, welcome, Alyssa. Alyssa is with Y Labs, and I'm going to let her, more than that, Alyssa, you tell them.
Sure. So I'm Alyssa Vishnik, the CEO and co-founder here at Y Labs. Y Labs is building what we call an observability system for AI applications. Our mission is to essentially build interfaces between human operators and AI applications, enabling humans operate AI, enabling us to make AI more transparent and less of a black box.
All right, I've got a bunch of stuff I want to hit on there, but before we do, people, our audience is full of technical people, and a lot of them, have aspirations of becoming a founder, have great ideas. Give them a little bit of your background, Alyssa. People always want to know, do I have what she has? Do I have what it takes? Give them a little of your background.
Sure, would love to do that. So I'm an engineer, just like most of your listeners. I started my career building websites in PHP, which probably a lot of the listeners have done as well. And then I spent 9 years at Amazon, first on kind of developer tool side. I was in the early days of Amazon adopting CI/CD best practices. We went from deploying to the retail website like once every quarter to deploying every hour, which was a very huge shift for tools and processes and culture. And then in 2012, when machine learning became sexy again, and all the enterprises started trying to deploy machine learning to production for various business use cases, I switched over and started leading kind of the production deployment efforts of various machine learning efforts at Amazon, things like supply chain, forecasting, recommendation systems, various deployments in the warehouses. And there were a lot of parallels, a lot of tools that we typically rely on in the kind of traditional software world. The DevOps tool chain were completely missing from the machine learning world, because in the machine learning world, you have to take care of the data that's flowing through the application, because it can dramatically alter the behavior of your AI application, the machine learning application. And then it's a probabilistic system, so it always gives you an answer. It like never technically fails. I started drawing those parallels, building out the kind of similar tool chain to the DevOps tool chain within Amazon first, and then got very, very passionate about the idea of figuring out what this tool chain is going to look like in, the real world outside of Amazon. So left Amazon in 2017 and talked to hundreds of people trying to figure out what the tool chain is going to look like, and spun out Y Labs in 2019 from a fundamental AI institute called the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence here in Seattle.
Very cool. Love it. What a great story, too, and congratulations. So, Alyssa, the whole observability thing is kind of a loaded word. It's so overhyped, typical Gartner hype cycle. It's almost, I would say it's at the peak of hype, and you know what happens, right? Next is the trial of disillusionment. And, but it's not there yet. People are still, it's still gathering momentum. As we were talking off camera, I'm reminded of my days in security when everyone wanted to build and implement a SIM. Security information, right, management, and would take security events, information events from all over and kind of make heads or tails of it. And the problem was it was such a big problem it was trying to tackle. It was almost too big, and people would get lost in the trees for the forest. We see the same thing with observability. If we look along the evolution here, we had sort of application management, right? APM, ALM, and then APM, and then we went to AI ops. Brought in this AI that was really ML. And we've had different kind of places along the way, right? And there's been some really successful companies, but when we start talking observability, almost by definition, we got a big data issue. right? And we look at some of the big open source observability programs out there, like Prometheus and of the open telemetry, stuff like that. They're really designed because we're going to have these huge data sets. And it's amazing that we can gather that much data, right? It's also really hard to make action heads or tails out of that much data. And it's almost like we're forced. The only way you're going to be able to wrap your arms around this is to use technologies like AI and ML. Fair? I mean, or you think
Fair. I agree. And I mean, I think whenever you're dealing with a lot of data, you have to start extracting patterns and extracting them very fast and very efficiently. And that's what essentially machine learning is built for.
Yes, but famous last words. I think when we look at the state of observability today, and when we look at actual installs of people using observability, I would venture to say that a lot of them are not getting the kind of bang for their buck that they thought they would. A lot of them are not seeing the kind of aha moments and insights and patterns that they thought they would. And I don't know if that's a failure of our ML, right, in observing these patterns. Is it a failure of the humans behind it in figuring out what are the patterns we even want to observe? Is it a failure? I don't think it's a failure of our data collection. We're real good at collecting data.
Yes.
No doubt about it. But, what do you think? And how does Y Labs help with that?
Yeah, so completely agree with you. I think observability is an extremely loaded term, and and the very simple manifestation of it, it just means that you need to understand what's happening in your system. And, that's not very easy because our systems are incredibly complicated. And as you keenly pointed out, if you're just accumulating a ton of data and then trying to extract patterns or some anomalous behaviors out of loads of data, it gets very expensive. So you're oftentimes risking that your observability setup is going to cost more than the actual deployment of your application. Sure. And then if you start applying machine learning to it, then you will run into a different set of problems. Well, machine learning models, they are very, very hard to operate, and they're very fickle. Oftentimes they fail in ways that are they fail all the time in ways that are very different than traditional software, where you have essentially a probabilistic system still saying that this is an anomaly, but maybe the confidence of this prediction is very low. Most machine learning systems don't have confidence intervals that they spit out at you. So you still get, consistent flow of predictions, but these predictions might be complete garbage. And then you get into kind of the next step of inception of like, okay, well, how do we monitor these machine learning models that are then, trying to help us monitor our traditional systems? And it's a whole big rabbit hole. I think as a community and as an industry, I think we'll be tackling this problem for probably another decade before we figure out what it really means to tackle it in a meaningful way. Now, where Y Labs fits in is we actually monitor and enable observability for this kind of second step of inception, where we monitor the machine learning systems. So in your big software application, there's typically this little black box that tells you whether the customer is going to churn or not, whether you get a credit card or not, whether something is an anomaly or not in the DevOps setup, and these systems tend to, as I said, be very fickle, and it's not the same to monitor the machine learning model as it is to monitor the traditional software application, because you have to monitor the statistical properties of the data that feeds into this machine learning model. And you have to recognize when the machine learning model just represents kind of a snapshot of reality. It looks at some data in the past and it says, okay, I understand what that data in the past looks like. So now I'm trying to draw parallels between what I see now and that data in the past. And when, the past becomes obsolete, the machine learning model becomes obsolete. So we monitor to recognize when is the past obsolete? Like when does the data change so significantly that your machine learning model is basically garbage? And we essentially then kind of follow the traditional senses of what observability is. We gather logs, metrics, traces, and we try to connect all of them. But as you said, it is very, very non-trivial to figure out what do you collect, how do you draw correlations, how do you surface that up to the human operator. And I think, we're, at least in the machine learning world, we're even earlier than the rest of the industry when it comes to understanding observability. Like in the machine learning world, data scientists oftentimes deploy the application that is powered by a machine learning model, and they don't even monitor how well the model is performing. And, it might be throwing out garbage for 6 months, and until somebody who is directly affected by it will scream at them, they wouldn't know. So we're at this point with Y Labs, we're kind of in the very, very early days of what observability in the traditional APM space was, I would say 5 years ago. We're just trying to preach that it's important to know what's happening in your machine learning application. We give you tools to make it very, very easy to set up and start gathering metrics and statistics. And then we give you, tools to visualize, tools to recognize anomalies and send you notifications or trigger some kind of automation and so on. But yeah, I agree with you. It's super early days, and I think we're headed for the hype of disillusionment, and then figuring out which of the bells and whistles we got to cut. And, going back to the notion that maintaining software is still a human process, and no matter what kind of data you gather and what types of tools you build, there is still going to be a human component to making sure it works.
Well, I'm glad to see we're keeping the human in it. But really, I'll be honest, this is the first. So to me, this is almost second generation kind of solution aimed at observability. Because I think for many observability solutions that I've seen, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it. Number one, they plug into this open source data collection layer. Like I said, open telemetry, Prometheus, whatever you have, right? You're plugging into this open source data collection. So everyone could collect data, right? That's table stakes, ante up. And you don't have to even build that yourself. You just plug into it.
Not if you're in the machine learning system. So if you're in the machine learning system, that doesn't work.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say. Then you separate the next class of people who say, okay, now I get that data, but I want to put it through a machine learning system. Some people call it AI. Some people call it ML. Some say AI, ML, whatever. Now I'm going to put it through this black box, if you will, and try to give you actionable intelligence, if that's still a word, right? We never hear a lot about how do you tune that black box? How do you improve the black box? How do you monitor the black box, right? How do you verify the black box? And so Y Labs is really, that's where you guys are, right? You're making sure that black box is doing what it's supposed to do. Oh, and if not, well, let's keep, finding out what it's not doing right, what it is, and we can improve it. So that's as I said, second generation. So how is Y Labs offered to the public then?
We're a SaaS, so you can think of us as something very similar to a Datadog or New Relic. We have agents, just like the APM monitoring systems have. The agent goes onto your around your machine learning model onto your system, and it collects statistics about the data that flows through the system, statistics about the outputs from your machine learning systems, statistics about the health of the machine learning black box itself. And we, send that over to the SaaS, and the SaaS monitors for anomalies and notifies. So very, very similar architecturally at a very high level, similar to a New Relic or a Datadog.
Got it. And then how is it priced, sold, however, offered, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, again, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, at least in the very beginning. So we went after some of the best practices of what we've seen in the APM world. There is a freemium, or rather a free tier. So we believe that everybody should try to monitor their machine learning models, whether they have money to do it or not. So we'll let you monitor one model for free. And then from there on, it's $50 per model per month. And there are some specific enterprise packages, because oftentimes we work with Fortune 500 enterprises and they have hundreds of models that they want to monitor, and they tend to be really, really massive models. So we provide special enterprise tier.
Excellent. We're about out of time, Alyssa, but for people who want to get more information, where can they go for Y Labs info?
They can go to ylabs.ai, and that's pretty much the one place that they could find everything about the company. We have an open source component to the agent is essentially an open source parallel that we're developing to OpenTelemetry. So there's a really easy way to get started and to see what you can collect about your machine learning model to essentially start opening up that black box. And then the SaaS is there. Anybody can sign up. It's completely open. And get us feedback. I would especially love feedback for the people who've been building observability on the APM side for, the past 5-6 years.
Absolutely. I love it. Congratulations. Keep up the great work. Come back and keep us posted on Y Labs, okay?
Absolutely. Would love to.
All right. Alyssa Visnik, CEO, co-founder. Y Labs. That's ylabs.ai. WHY. Alyssa, thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you, Alan. You too. Really fantastic to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we are back. Welcome back. Next up, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Secure Software Summit virtual event that we held earlier this year. This is a presentation by Shannon Leitz, who is the VP of Vulnerability Labs at Adobe, and she has a presentation titled How to Achieve DevSecOps Maturity. This is a great presentation with a lot of takeaways, so let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hi, this is Shannon Leitz. I am here with the Software Summit, and I'm going to talk to us a bit about breaking into DevSecOps, a maturity story. I've been talking about DevSecOps for a really long time in my career. I'm super passionate about this space, and I really think this is such a big deal for us as a community. So quick shout out a little bit about me. I have been in this industry for a really long time, since the 1980s. Kind of what makes me human is to basically work with my little girls on STEM, and they're a bunch of ballet. And I like to do comic strips on the side. I also like to do kickboxing, so I'm super into those things. I also spend my days with the DevSecOps Foundation, a lot of the folks out there. My day job, I work for Adobe. I'm excited to be there. I just joined about 8 months ago. And I also help with IONS and Hacker Girl, which is something to bring cybersecurity to more women. So I'm going to start my story with a blank slide for a minute. And I'm going to tell you that one of the things I really deeply appreciate is the learning life cycle, and the DevOps community has always been such a great place for me to participate, because I would say lifelong learner is the way to think about me. So when learning starts with awareness, it builds upon understanding. You gain folks when they get to commitment, and ultimately that turns into operations or actions. And I like to say that all things that we're doing cultural wise and the things that we're trying to tackle, the hard problems in the world, really get solved through this algorithm. So if you're not aware of it, I would say go look up some of the work that Stanford does, because building out your strategies really does require some change management. And I believe that's kind of at the essence of cultural development. So I'm going to go back to and think about for a moment, hindsight is essentially 2020. Well, not really. Hindsight turns out to be 2022 for me right now. And I think, we've all been through the pandemic, endemic. And I think we're starting to get to the point where we realize some of the ways that we work together can be done more digitally, can be done more natively. And I think some of that is brought to bear because of storytelling. So I'm going to start this keynote off with the fact that I'm going to tell a bit of story, and then I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what it takes to do the maturity journey for DevSecOps. I've been working in this space for over a decade, particularly around DevSecOps and what it really takes to bring to bear. I would say I've been a keen fan of DevOps for a really long time, and Agile as well. So you can see like a lot of my career has really been around more of the emerging change management space, and I'm super excited about it. So if I go way, way, way back in my story to where all things sort of started, I would say computers really kind of came to bear because scaling computation is challenging. Imagine for a moment, I have two little girls who work in kind of mathematics every day, and the new math that's out there is a bit challenging for some of us that learned it the old way. So I'm sure you can relate to that if you have children that are in school right now and trying to figure things out. For me, I think that the essence of this lesson is that because scaling computation is challenging, it created this need, this emergence in humanity to get to the point where more of what we were doing was compute driven. And I think that started really early, several hundred years ago, around how you actually calculated things. In particular, one of the change periods that I like most is when the mainframe came to bear. And I think that this was really interesting because, this picture is depicting what it took to really run compute back when. And hardware was really room size. So you really needed a really large place to do this work. It was really about centralized processing, integrated compute and storage. And then for some, they remember ticker tapes and punch cards, and it was really instruction based. And essentially, your programs were time sharing on this equipment because it was so large, so expensive, and so challenging to master. And really, it was unfriendly. I would say computers came with humans had to learn their language, and not necessarily that computers had to learn the human language. And I think that this is really what we're at the forefront of a lot of the things that we once thought around computing becoming really changed in the industry. So this is at the basis of my story. And I would say that with mainframes, the adversaries out there, in particular, the way you thought about security started with the unskilled programmer. And then as part of designing for a mainframe security, you wanted to be able to figure out when you might have human error. So you built up some of the things that are built into native mainframes and their operating systems. So you had things like RACF around how do you actually deal with finding these things, making sure that they go away. It was non-trivial to fix computer programs back then. So having some of that instrumentation was really critical to making the hardware effective and being able to service all the needs for it. And there was a third here, which was mostly espionage. So you had a few adversary types that traditional mainframes had to solve for. And for me, the beginning of all security goes back to, well, why did we need to do it? And when did we need to do it? And for what purpose? And these three security drivers, I think, really brought to bear a mainframe that solved for its hardware, its security paradigm, its programming requirements. And essentially, as humans, we had to learn all those things so that we could be good at running these really big machines to help us with transactional compute. imagine for a moment, like the census really did benefit from some of this work. And if you look back, encryption and some of the things that were done during the wars, a lot of those were a lot of the drivers for compute back when, which is why you see these three main adversary types really at the forefront of the story. And if I kind of look past this, you kind of think about what did it take to create security for a mainframe? And I go back to the security hierarchy of needs, something that I've worked with many people to introduce in the industry and that I leverage as part of my way of making security accessible and memorable for folks and really turning it into pearls. And so for me, these 5 things are at the heart of what it takes to get a mainframe set up for security. They had things like logging and audit trails. Encryption was very much baked in. You had some of the authentication through things like I said, RACF and asset management. You really couldn't lose a building-sized computer very easily, and the components in it had to be mastered. A lot of the compute infrastructure was very much hardware-based. And zoning and containment was done through the computer living in the building and what it could reasonably be located next to be able to do compute. So you had a really limited security infrastructure need at that bottom of the pyramid, which meant that really essentially mainframes did solve for a lot of need, and they made it very easy to do some of these client server native use cases. I like to start this also off with a Wardley map kind of esque discussion, because I think that really at the forefront of mainframes, you saw a few use cases kind of start to create that genesis. The change management went into making it so you could have custom built mainframe level computers, and essentially eventually that created an entire industry of companies that were starting to be able to make these more cost efficient. And so the product, looked like it was going to do relatively well, up until we started realizing that the use cases were going to go way up. And we actually found that because we had to build room-sized things and the use cases could go up for compute, that created a bit of that demand curve. And ultimately, this was around a 200-year plus generation or synthesis of calculation and compute. This essentially led us to having hardware be created so that end users could essentially use that hardware and that software. And so within this infrastructure being broken down from a mainframe, essentially hardware being divided from software allowed it to be maybe even more distributed in terms of compute. And so hardware for every human, having an individual being able to have maybe even a computer in their own household was something that was a mere dream at the time. And I think that started to create a little bit of a radical transformation where we were starting to see innovation happening to take huge computer hardware and turn it into something that could ultimately be shipped out to a household and then serviced by software providers in those big buildings that you see here. So that led to essentially what I like to say is a demand curve shift. And so because there was demand and there was this need for computers, ultimately what happened is the genesis that took place during when people found that mainframes could be useful actually became the next wave of what would ultimately overtake the mainframe as being the potential for compute throughout the industry. And so this genesis work that was done was around the 1970s, 1980s. You can see that a lot of the work that was out there that generated the computers that we now call our individual computers, and even getting to the point where you have a cell phone and things like that, was really done to figure out how to make computers more useful for humans. And essentially, instead of training humans to speak computer, we were now seeing the possibility of what computers could do for us, and maybe even start to think about how we could make it so that we could write more software as a community and we could distribute that functionality. That gives you the ability to reach more use cases, essentially. So with that, we also saw the creation shortly thereafter of the internet. And that was an interesting time period because now you had essentially hardware which had software on it and then protocols to create the ability for software that might be housed in companies behind four walls. I like to kind of create the whole jail picture here, because we essentially put our software in jail, is the way I like to think about that revolution, because we put huge hosting providers together. They had essentially racks of equipment and they were all caged. And so we were essentially building up software that could be accessed for distributed compute. There were protocols to make it so that we could exchange information more rationally. And during this period, we saw a lot of innovation. I remember back when the dot-com boom happened, and some of those things that really traditionally led us to some of the evolution that inspired us as a community. And that led to a bit of what I say got me into a lot of this next journey. And I think it's really that waterfall, agile DevOps movement. We were starting to realize we weren't moving as fast as we wanted to as a community to get to customer use cases. We weren't as creative as we wanted to be. And so for me, I've always been a creative type. I've always moved closer and closer to that innovation space, that emerging space, always moved to the next thing, because I really want to be at that forefront of creation and design. And for me, that has led to an inspiration of how do you help folks to be able to do that change management? How do you think ahead, have dreams? And culture is the most important aspect to DevOps, succeeding in the enterprise. I love when Patrick Dubois said this, because for me, it's an inspiration to see that at the heart of all of this, we've really been liberating compute capabilities for a lot of the folks that are out there to leverage it in their daily lives. We wouldn't have AI/ML, we wouldn't have some of the voice-enabled services without some of these demands and these use cases coming up. So it's been traditionally a big drive. I think the developer revolt's really real, because you see that ultimately what drives the developers, that they want to create something very useful for the customers that they might have. And that creates a great drive for a lot of this change. And with that, new models, for anybody who remembers back the OSI model, and for anybody who works with some of the cloud providers out there, they still have to know the OSI model. They still have to be able to create those infrastructures and liberate software. And essentially, this is the liberation of software. Everything has become software defined. We've made it so hardware no longer we have to speak its language, but it speaks our language. And that has created some of the ability for us to do some of those next generation things. And the cloud being born from that. Software not only being able to speak the language of a human, but being able to now exchange and do interface-based compute. You still have your hardware and your software capabilities in your house. That has been a mainstay, but some of the evolution to how we actually interchange and distribute computing so we can solve huge problems across the world has become liberated through the cloud and some of these APIs and really SaaS-based services or IaaS or even PaaS services. They've really allowed us to exchange as a community and create more and more innovation that's going to be higher speeds. And I think these are really the tenets of what begins this story. And if you remember back to when I said these were the three original adversary types that were conceived when we got into essentially electronic-based compute, today's generation and all of that innovation has left behind quite a bit of the security task. While engineering teams are busy deploying leading edge technologies, security teams are still focused on fighting yesterday's battles. I totally believe in the survey that was generated. You still see a lot of this today. Folks are still trying to figure out how they're going to put security to the forefront, shift it left, figure out what to do with it. And that's been at the basis of my work. I like to think that if we had done this well, we would have had maybe the same or fewer of those three circles originally, but really what's generated a lot more capability for the adversary communities is the change management of distributed computing. And so this has given rise to a lot more adversary types. I would say those categories of adversaries now have abuse capabilities at their disposal. They're leveraging some of the same platforms we all are. And it has created really that rallying cry for change. For me, that has turned it into essentially a bit of like 2016 going back a bit for me. what really spurred me on was to see that this traditional compute infrastructure, everything was changing. There was a demand by the customer to have more and more capability at their disposal. Mobile was becoming a thing. And if you look further out, really security has had to change, and it has been on the emerging front for quite some time. So this is a 2016 slide. I've got some from recent, and I'll definitely share in that space as we go on. I think that this leads to what is next, and what is ultimately next is trying to figure out all these patterns that are going to come from this. 2014 ultimately, before even sharing that Wordly map, led to a bit of, hey, things are changing. We need to do better as a security community. And the inspiration was really this manifesto. We sat down and said, we need to lean in over saying, no, a lot of the things on this have still been true. And I think we are as a community trying to get to the point where we are more left than right on this list of things that we've put together. I really think that getting rid of fear, uncertainty, doubt is a mainstay. So let's talk about levels, because everybody wants to know how they're going to get started and then how they're going to get to the point where they mature, and how can they be level 5, because everybody wants to have that gold star at the end. And ultimately, I'd tell you it's a journey. And a lot of the journey for me in terms of telling the story started in 2014. While it still started a bit earlier than that, I don't think I had a lot of the understanding truly of being able to tell the story to others until I had done a bunch of experimentation. This is some of the initial work that was done to put the experiments in place as we were working on things like migrating as a community to the cloud and AWS and Azure and Google and all of these different providers out there. I think that's necessary to create those drivers for change to happen. And embedding into DevOps really didn't work. It was quite a disaster. There was a lot that was happening at the time. And really, security professionals couldn't just bring their checklist, pop down in the middle of a development team, and get to work. They had to have development skills. And so that meant all of us had to have development skills. We had to figure out the art of DevSecOps. We had to get to the point where we could get more of this figured out in a way that would make it consumable for our peers and partners. In level 2, DevOps growth was off the charts. In 2004, DevOps.com was bought. And you could see that it took quite some time for it to evolve. And now we're even in a faster part of this life cycle. In 2015, for me, what it felt like was security engineering was relatively new. There wasn't this thing called compliance operations, or what people now call policy as code. Security wasn't code at the time, and there wasn't this thing called security science. You really just didn't have data at your disposal. It wasn't cheap enough. And so thankfully, the clouds have all created those capabilities. Imagine adding security into your DevOps pipeline. This is a lot of what it looked like. Your business, your UX, your dev, your data. A lot of people say things like dev star ops, because there's a lot of different things that have to come into this discipline. And really, security self-service required a lot of these things and these skills to be able to be brought to bear for operational people to take advantage of, and the business, and some of the folks that are creating software, and as well as our customers. I think level 3, shortly thereafter, it was an innovation idea, was to look around and see what other enterprises were doing, and be inspired by them, and as well as trying to figure out what was working in the industry. Where were we seeing some of these build security in, or build safety in? And you look at like the Edwards-Deming process. And I think that supply chain is really at the essence of creating that faster security feedback loop, where you design, you build, you deploy, and you operate. But really, that security feedback loop has to go back to design. It has to be, and is, a needed constraint for you to build better and safer things over time. So the better and safer things turns into, well, traditional security is really just not going to work long term. And so what had to happen in the relative to 2016 timeframe for me was security was everyone's responsibility. You couldn't just have silos of it. It wasn't somebody else that you could shuttle it off to and it was going to be fine. In fact, those processes were just not working. And now that it is everyone's responsibility, I still think that generates a lot of demand and need for change. In fact, new things like new innovations that have to happen. But I still believe that those innovations come back to these 5 tenets, and the 5 tenets are pretty simple. They've created a lot of the disciplines that we have out there, the things that we know work against the abuse cases or adversary cases that are out there. So keeping it kind of straight, having a model to work from allows you to advance your maturity and your capability. And I think it's really critical to have something to tie to, so that as you're testing, as you're trying to make change happen, as you're designing things, these core 5 things can actually reduce about 80% of the abuse cases out there. And again, I think that really DevSecOps is not just about getting software safe and perfect, but it's also making it adversary resilient. So somewhere in this time frame, I really became very adversary minded in my approach. With the things that I was leading and changing and experimenting with. And the automated testing and inspection pipeline. We talk about DevSecOps as if it is mostly about the CI/CD pipeline. And I would say that's a bit of a miss in the industry. We really have to think about the ability to leverage the CI/CD pipeline to bring security closer and closer to developed software. But you'll also find that developed software is now a fabric and a distribution that does need to be continually tested, not only as part of construction, but as part of basically deployment as well. So a lot of the work that you do is to make software as safe as possible for what it's intended to do, and then to look for those edge cases. And so some of these CI/CD pipelines have to also include this continuous notion of feedback and a security testing and data platform. This is not the best picture I've ever generated, but it's absolutely one that you can see helps you to understand that the attacker's out there and they're sort of leveraging that same pipeline that a customer is leveraging. And we can get more information as a community. We can have things like security observability. I've been telling this story for a really long time because we are not seeing the advancements quite that we need to get more and more of the security capabilities built in. I think we're still in this custom built part of this journey. There are some folks out there that are starting to make headway. We are seeing that commercialization of DevSecOps, and we have done a great job, I think, in trying to advance it as a cause. And I think that we're starting to make strides in a way that allows it to be commoditized, but that we have missed some of the things that make it so that you get that full understanding of DevSecOps. It's really that adversary notion. That creates a lot of the demand for, what are attackers doing? What are those pathways? How do we solve for those? How do developers understand what they are as part of the things that they can generate? And as you create new features, how could those be abused in a way that you actually have to be mindful about? In 2016, we knew these things. We had a lot of understanding about them. And it created a sense of, well, what's the next thing we have to solve for if we know about these things? We've got to have this understanding of what it means. It should feel like we're actually continually improving. And so we put this behavior chart together to figure out how to essentially, in the end, stay ahead of bad guys and have that adversary resilience really be your fly mechanism. If you're doing CI/CD, I'd say you can get to a point where you're being more proactive, but you're probably still in between levels 2 and 3 in reality. If you're not measurement bound, if you're not doing OKRs, if you're not subscribing to some of these measurement practices, it can be a bit challenging. So one of the things that I learned along the way was, hey, when you get some of the information out of these systems and you essentially pull down the information and the features and the defects, you can grade these things, and that can make it more accessible ultimately for developers. There's a large body of context in the security community, whether it be the work being done by MITRE or the kill chain or any of the things that are now trying to create some semblance of a discipline that can be measured. You have to have some of these rubrics to be able to determine, are we doing the things that everybody else is doing? So you do have to have them, but because they are so challenging and they do require a lot of context, they do require you to create a bit of an accessibility layer for people to leverage the security mindset and capabilities of professionals and experts. I think that really that leads to the fact that in 1976, essentially security in my mind was left out of some critical papers for quality. And these critical papers for quality created a bit of this notion that security, like how we were doing mainframes, was essentially an integrity problem. And you can see in here in the very middle there, it says integrity. Is it secure? And these critical software factors that were out there for quality led to how we were going to test software, how we were going to decide it was great and okay. And that created several decades of this is what it takes to have quality software. And I think that we kind of didn't get what we needed to out of that. So what I've worked on and introduced in my research with a lot of folks out there is this notion of securability, having our quest for reducing exploitable opportunities, whether it be shift left in your CI/CD pipeline pre-deployment, or it be they got out of the gate and you didn't know how they were going to be exploited, or something that was really unknown at the time, or even the deterioration of software being exposed. I think that this measurement has really helped me to ground myself in what it means to do great things with software and having software safer sooner. At the basis of that, having a measurement is what leads you to that level 5 and being able to do continuous integration of security and being able to monitor for it and making sure that you've got all of the security things that you need in your software and that you've got your abuse cases mastered so that you understand that you're providing the best view of your software for your developed customer, and over time reducing more and more the adversaries and the abuse cases in your software. This has led to a lot of innovation, but ultimately I would say we are all now basically scratching at the surface of the software bill of materials, because the large demand here is, now that we know how we can measure some of the security that's out there, it is not only the component parts that we all build individually, but it's the ones that we actually snap together that creates the fabric of distributed computing. And so now it's going to require us to be able to share information, to synthesize it in a way that it's accessible without necessarily having to divulge all these different things about what software is. A developer always asks, how many lines of code do they have to really worry about? And I always say, are you sure you only have a few lines of code? Is it really only a few lines of code? And I did a study here. I actually talked to a few folks, and Snick, thank you for this example. But 222 lines of code has turned into essentially 5 direct dependencies, 54 total dependencies, and that can easily mean that a very small program can still be hundreds of thousands of lines of code that we know through practice cannot actually be dealt with and innovation driven forward without automation to help reduce the potential for these critical security vulnerabilities that get created in ways that we don't expect. So I would say, ultimately at the beginning of the forefront of continuous integration is this need for software bill of materials. And I always say that when you find something hard to work on, it's worth banging your head. And I tend to be a big believer that finding hard challenges and working on them will actually allow us to move forward as a community faster. So my work has really helped to figure out, what does it mean to bang your head on this problem, the software bill of materials. OWASP does a great job of enumerating some of the defects in software to help us as a community. I will tell you, though, you need to actually leverage observability against this discipline that's being created by OWASP so you can understand your own adversaries and understand what they're doing. Because you can see here that researchers do certain things, scanners can do a bunch of other things. You might even see paid noise by your adversaries. And ultimately, that allows advanced adversaries to move forward with things that you never intended to be part of your software stack. So to me, continuous improvement is about less guessing, more real world, more observability. And I think ultimately, in the end, simplifying everything. I go back to what I believe really has helped my understanding of software becoming safer become a critical part of what I do every day. And that is the security hierarchy of needs. And I think that, I always carry this cat with me to every one of my talks because ultimately it's the skeptical cat. It's the one that keeps me thinking about the future, really trying to understand it, driving me forward as a researcher. I will tell you, this is my next generation of that same Wardley map. And ultimately, I think we're all chasing the next generation of compute, which leads us to more AI, ML. And the future is really anyone's guess. But for me, this is my guess. So, to inspire you to think about what we could be doing together, I think that it's really important for us to understand that at the heart of all AI, ML, there is a security challenge at our forefront, and that we want to be able to do more things as humans. We have to solve for it. So thank you for listening to me today. Here's some books that I really think are amazing. I'm a big proponent for some of the folks that have written these books and taken the time to educate us on things like DevOps and accelerating our capabilities and thinking about security. So if you get a chance, I would definitely inspire you to read some of these. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article about SREs and DevOps, and whether choosing one over the other is the right approach. The age-old question about the competition between DevOps and SRE sets up a false dichotomy. DevOps is a methodology, while SRE is a team within operations. Although the two are often pitted against one another, developers also embody the skills and capabilities to implement fixes. The process of SRE formalizes problem resolution playbooks for better efficiency within the development lifecycle. This has changed substantially over the past few years, with DevOps seeing more traction and mainstream adoption. So what is the modern relationship between DevOps and SRE, and how can they best be used together? This article attempts to answer these questions and more about ways in which organizations can utilize both roles effectively. And we look once again at low-code development, this time its future role in dev environments. The days when IT teams relied on clunky software development processes and labor-intensive hand coding to build tangible, reliable, and modern applications are coming to an end. With the rise of new automation technology, rapidly rising expectations and demands from innovation-craving customers and end users, and a shortage of developers, the software sector has been forced to seek alternative approaches to not only deliver their services and costs and products, but also to remain digitally current. Low-code development platforms are becoming a way to address this challenge. Low-code, no-code tools are quickly becoming the next prototyping tools in the enterprise, without needing the technical skills in traditional user experience or visual designer-focused tooling. With low-code or no-code tools, screen design is typically done using a drag-and-drop WYSIWYG design time experience. The main difference between this and a UX visual design tool is that the low-code, no-code code tool is building a running app in the background with real code, connected data, real screen interactions, and more. This means that any team member with an idea can express the design, not just a person who has access to the designer. There are other ways in which low-code is becoming more useful in development, and this article covers them and more. In news, Datadog has made generally available application security monitoring, a service designed to make it easier for DevOps teams to add additional DevSecOps best practices to their existing workflows. ASM is based on a runtime application self-protection engine and web application firewall that Datadog gained with the acquisition of Screen a year ago. It employs distributed tracing to discover code-level vulnerabilities, such as server-side request forgeries, SQL injection, and cross-site scripting flaws. It is designed to extend the Datadog Cloud Security Platform, which also includes Cloud Security Posture Management, Cloud Workload Security, and Cloud SIEM services. All right, over on Container Journal, we look at the butterfly effect of Kubernetes configurations and efficiency. In chaos theory, the butterfly effect happens when a tiny change in one sensitive initial condition has a huge impact down the line. And it's a great analogy for Kubernetes configuration and the way its overall success affects cloud efficiency. Organizations that make the best possible use of their cloud resources at the lowest cost with minimal waste and effort are optimizing their cloud efficiency. Along with container security and reliability, maintaining robust cloud efficiency remains one of the most pressing concerns in Kubernetes and cloud-native technology today. When best practices around Kubernetes configuration and misconfiguration, as the case may be, are not properly addressed, efficiency can be severely compromised, along with performance and optimization of resources. This means practitioners need to perform a lot of different checks to ensure their workloads are running efficiently and cost-effectively. Building an efficient cloud environment means assessing all dimensions of the configuration posture to ensure Kubernetes clusters and containerized workloads are happy and secure. Because without configuration best practices in place, the butterfly effect will jeopardize cloud efficiency along with other markers such as security, reliability, and cost. This article looks at what organizations need to consider to experience the benefits of the butterfly effect. And we look at the results of a survey from New Relic that shows the prevalence of Java apps in container environments. The State of the Java Ecosystem report finds that more than 70% of Java applications in production environments are running inside a container. A much higher percentage of applications are running on fewer than 4 cores when encapsulated in containers, which is a bad thing because it doesn't provide the concurrent benefits from the default G1 garbage collector on recent Java virtual machines when running fewer than 2 cores. Single-core instances may be using the serial collector, and that creates performance overhead that IT teams may not be aware of. The report also finds Java 11, which was released in 2019, is now being used by nearly half of applications running in production environments. Java 8, however, is still being used by almost half, or 46% of the applications. And on Security Boulevard, we take a look at some of the proposed changes to the SEC's InfoSec rules, which could have a substantive impact on how companies describe and project their cybersecurity readiness. The proposed rules are to enhance and standardize disclosures regarding cybersecurity risk management, strategy, governance, and incidents reporting by public companies. That's according to the SEC. And they show the SEC's intent to standardize information flowing from companies and ensure it is available to all investors. The change includes requiring cybersecurity incidents to be reported via Form 8K, as well as periodic disclosures regarding policies and procedures to identify and manage cybersecurity risks. Also, management's role in implementing cybersecurity policies and procedures, board of directors' cybersecurity expertise, if any, and its oversight of cybersecurity risks, and updates on previously reported incidents. For some, these requirements will be a light lift. For others, it will constitute a sea change. This article dives into the potential impact these proposed changes could have on public companies and ways in which they can shift their cybersecurity operations to accommodate the SEC's InfoSec rules. And finally, we look at DevSecOps as a way for organizations to scale their application security. Security is a dilemma for many leaders. On the one hand, it is largely recognized as essential, but on the other hand, it does not drive business. As an organization matures, security can become a business enabler, but the roadmap is unclear. With the rise of agile practices, DevOps, and the cloud, development timeframes have been considerably compressed, but application security remains essentially the same. DevSecOps emerged as an answer to this dilemma, inserting security principles, practices, and tools into the DevOps workflow stream. So why isn't DevSecOps already the norm? Recent research from GitGuardian revealed that culture is the sticking point and a major obstacle to greater DevSecOps adoption. Only by enabling new capacities across Dev, Sec, and Ops teams can the culture be changed. This article offers a high-level overview of the prerequisites required to scale up application security across departments and enable such capabilities. All right, that's it for the headlines. I'll be back tomorrow with a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jason Langsdorf, who is the VP of Developer Experience over at Netlify. Jason, thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy day to talk with me today. Do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Great. So I'm interested in talking to you about the developer experience, which is, as VP, it's something you're very familiar with. But before we get started, perhaps you can introduce us to Netlify.
Sure. So Netlify is a platform for getting web content online. It's if there are 3 standard buckets of work to get a website online, you have to stand up servers, you have to get them scaled, make sure they go wherever they go, and then you have to also build the kind of boilerplate of the website, all the underlying stuff that you have local dev and environment variable sharing, and make sure that you've got the ability to get feedback from people, staging environments, dev environments, so on and so forth. And then finally, there's the work that is actually the logic of the website, the value that you're delivering to your user, the features you want to build, right? And because with websites, if you're building a web app, an e-commerce store, a dashboard, something like that, the hosting of front-end files is going to be almost exactly the same no matter what type of business you're running. Mm-hmm. Netlify is here to eliminate 2 of those buckets. So we will kind of automate the CI/CD and the sort of release management that goes into getting a web front end online. And we also automate a lot of the dev environment provisioning, staging environment provisioning, environment variable securing and sharing, the orchestration of getting serverless functions and proxies and API gateways, all that stuff, getting that set up and scaled in a way so that the front end team is kind of empowered to do this work mostly on their own in a way that's safe, not with them pushing really expensive buttons, but with them having a one-click deploy so that the team can confidently focus on that 3rd bucket, which is where the real value comes in, where they can build features, deliver a great experience to the users.
That sounds like awesome technology, I got to tell you. And that's probably one of the most comprehensive description of a company I've ever gotten on Techstrong TV. So you get the gold star for that one. But hey, let's talk about developer experience, because I know that especially over the last 2 years, everybody's lives were turned upside down because of the pandemic. We all know that. Absolutely. Everybody was sent home, and they a good number of folks never really even thought about working from home before. And a good number of companies never even thought that they would see their entire workforces work remotely, let alone, even some of them. So a lot has changed, and not only in the way that organizations view their employees and how they work, but developers and other employees have kind of taken stock in what they, previously thought was just a normal, part of their job. Now they're kind of questioning some things that maybe they're not so happy about. And so, the culture of an organization obviously has a lot to do with the employees' happiness. And that is certainly true when it comes to developers as well. So what is it that you're seeing? Because we are seeing so many people moving over to different jobs, the great reshuffling, great resignation, whatever you want to call it. There's so much movement right now happening in the job ranks that it seems to me that there's definitely something amiss, and we've got some issues that we need to address.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing, and I think this is me saying I'm seeing it as I'm part of making these same mistakes. So this is not like we got it right. The major challenge that I think companies are having is that the market is accelerating at a rate that I've personally never seen. Salaries are going through the roof. The demand for experienced developers is really high, and anybody who wants to change jobs can almost do so without even having to apply. You can just whisper to one person in the community, hey, I might be open to a job, and you'll have 2 offers by the end of the week. It's really aggressive right now.
Wow.
So what companies are thinking is in the old way of like, well, you stay in a job for 2 years, you'll get cost of living raises, maybe you'll get that promo if you really do good work. And what everybody in the market is seeing is, well, if I stay at this job for 18 months, I can go get 150% raise if I go to this new company. And the 15% raise at my company for doing good work just isn't going to cut it. Mm-hmm. So companies, I think, we haven't learned how to do that second and third order math of we'll balk at giving somebody a 50 or 60% raise if they're a great performer on our team. We're like, well, that's not how it's done. You don't give somebody that much money. But if we don't, they're going to leave, take all of their domain knowledge with them. Now we have to spin up the recruiting team to go pays because otherwise they're not coming over. The market's shifted. And we're going to lose all of that productivity and ramp time as we get them trained up on the software. So it ends up costing us a whole lot more not to give those big raises to stay competitive with the way the market's inflating. But we still haven't quite learned how to have those conversations without severe heebie-jeebies, because I mean, like the idea that your salary rate is going to exponentially grow is terrifying as a company, but it's going to happen whether we're doing it by hiring new people who just won't start unless the rate goes up, or whether we do it by retaining the great people we've already trained by paying them that rate that they could get if they went somewhere else.
Yeah. I keep hearing about, salaries skyrocketing and developers basically in the driver's seat when it comes to, finding new jobs and choosing. They can be a lot more choosy because normally it's like buying a house. You got multiple offers and, which is going to be the best one for you in the long run. But money isn't everything. I mean, I hate to say that because, that seems to be the big driver here these days, but it's all about culture too, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, you join a company because it meets your financial needs, right? And then you'll stay at a company until it makes you unhappy. I know that there are people who could leave Netlify today and make a much bigger salary at a company that they are morally opposed to, or at a company that is really big and wouldn't give them a lot of autonomy or trust or buy-in. They stay because Netlify is a company that works very hard on giving people the buy-in to go and do work without needing 7 layers of approvals. They're able to make decisions. When they raise feedback, they can raise it directly to our CEO, and our CEO is going to listen to them. Mm-hmm. That sort of connection, I always say work's not a family, but it is a community, right? Mm-hmm. And Netlify is a well-tended community. We pay attention. When we get feedback, we do our best to respond to that feedback and adjust the way that we run things. We make a ton of mistakes, but what I have liked about Netlify is it doesn't feel like we make the same mistakes multiple times. And that to me is that sense of growth and investment in the health of our company that I do think causes people to stay. But what I've found is as soon as a company starts to get that culture wrong, the money matters a whole lot again. Yeah. Right. And it can just take that one mistake and that send somebody teetering. And so what I don't think that it's one or the other. I don't think you can create an amazing culture and not pay people enough money. I think you have to pay them enough money and create that amazing culture, because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have that misstep. Somebody's going to put their foot in their mouth. Somebody's going to have a teachable moment. And if you're not paying people well enough, that teachable moment can be enough to throw people off kilter. And if they feel like maybe this is the right time to start looking, they're going to get got if you're paying them 75% of what the market's willing to afford.
Well, yeah. And to your point, the culture is not something that's just, just a static thing. Culture evolves over time. So right. as we see organizations become either hybrid or fully remote, the culture inevitably changes, whether it's for the better or for the worse. There are going to be certain employees who are just not happy in this new remote environment or hybrid environment because either they don't have enough structure or because something has changed with their workflow that they're just not they're just not happy with anymore. So how do you deal with that?
So I think that part of the problem is that different environments are optimized for different personality types, right? Like the in-office environment is super optimized for the extrovert, the person who's going to meet everybody, have lots of conversations, create a lot of motion. But that person, I as somewhat of an extrovert myself, and for some of the folks I know who are extreme extroverts, they are really struggling with remote work because they just feel like, I don't get enough people time. I don't get, like, how do we make decisions if we can't look each other in the eye? And a Zoom call doesn't substitute for that in-person experience. However, there are a bunch of people who are, very much on the introvert end of the spectrum, and they have really thrived in this space because it's enforced that asynchronous communication via text. We all write down our thoughts, and then everybody reads the thoughts and then adds comments and discussion. And I think that part of it is that, extroverts like me have needed to learn that we were actually missing half the conversation by not giving the introverts time to process. If I come to a meeting and I just spout an idea and I say, does anybody have any objections? To somebody who's an introvert and needs a minute to think about it, I'm basically setting them up to fail. Because they're either going to say, I don't want to do this because I need time to think about it, or I guess I can't think of anything right now, so I guess go. And then they have to feel like a jerk if they pull the brake later after they've had time to process. So by doing that slowdown, it's taken an adjustment in both directions. I think introverts have had to learn that a little bit of assertiveness is going to be absolutely necessary, even in remote work. In a completely asynchronous world, you still have to be willing to say, hey, I have thoughts. You got to stop talking and let me finish. And with the Zoom like that, even that half second of Zoom delay, the jump in a meeting is really hard. And then the extroverts have had to learn how to do asynchronous communication, how to make a decision without pulling all the stakeholders into a room and pointing at each one and saying, okay, you done? You good? You good? You good? And that has also been, I think, really good. But what I found is that some cultures aren't making that. They're not making those adjustments. They're letting whoever the strongest personalities in the room are, whether they're introverts or extroverts, force the culture one way or the other. And that causes a really odd sticking point where if you take an extreme extrovert that reports to an extreme introvert and you say, okay, never a meeting again, everything is asynchronous, all of our communication will be done in memos, that extrovert's going to lose it. They're just going to have such a hard time, right? Yeah. And the same if it's vice versa. The introvert now has to go to every meeting, always speak, no thinking time. You got to be on your feet all the time. They're going to lose it. So I think it's been extremely challenging because nobody taught us how to do this stuff. We're all making it up as we go.
Yeah. And you make a really good point about, introverts and extroverts working together and whether one, a supervisor is opposite what the employee is. I wonder if that's actually going to change as more organizations recognize that in today's working environment, personality matching is so much more important, and it's going to be kind of a critical factor in hiring decisions in the future. Because if you want to have a productive workforce, then you're going to need to make sure that everybody can work together in a way that is most comfortable for them and doesn't feel forced, and is at the end of the day everybody's happy with. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes in just the way hiring practices evolve and the way companies look to their hiring practices and their firing practices for that matter. I think we're going to be seeing some serious changes, and maybe not all of them are going to be for the better. Maybe we'll see some that are going to be changing for the worse. But, at this point, I believe we're still early days, even though we're 2 years into this pandemic. But
business moves slow, right? And what I hope is that enough of us have recognized that this is a different game. We're not playing the on-prem, we're not even playing the hybrid office game anymore. And I think anybody who's worked in a hybrid office knows that it doesn't work, right? Wherever, if leadership is remote, you're a remote company. If leadership is on-prem, you're an on-prem company. And if you're the opposite of that, then you're just out of the loop. It doesn't, you know what I mean? And so I think the trick, what I hope we learn is that we're in a new world, and that if we really want to thrive, and also if people are worried about these skyrocketing salaries, maybe we should start looking at how do we bring in people who are earlier in their careers, because we hear about a developer shortage, but there's no developer shortage. We are looking at so many developers who are ready to come in and do this work, and they're ready to learn. Some of them are career switchers, which means they have an entire career's worth of knowledge and skill coming from, management somewhere else, or maybe they worked in human resources and have all of this organizational complexity wrangling down pat. All sorts of people are coming into this field and they're ready to do the work, but we haven't set up the organizational structure that lets those people come in. So we're instead sitting around saying, well, we need developers. And then when we dig into what we mean by that, what we're actually saying is, well, I need a developer who's also a product manager and also an engineering manager, and also can take care of their own time, and also will never need any human resources support because we don't have any of that. Right. And so you're asking somebody who can come in and do 5 jobs as well as being like a top tier engineer. And that there's just very few of those people who are completely self-contained. And that's why everybody's fighting over them and why salaries are through the roof. But if we just spend a little bit of effort on, like, how do our engineering managers function in a remote world? Can we set them up to provide structure and foundation and support? How does our human resources team support remote workers? What are the programs that are in place? What are the right touch points? How do we check in to see when things are going wrong? How do we make sure that somebody who's earlier in their career or new to a job isn't off in a lonely silo because they don't know if they're allowed to ask for help? Like, all these things that kind of happen right out of the gate with somebody who's new. If we put those structures in place, there are a lot of people who will come in at reasonable salaries, ready to learn, with no bad habits, no ego. They're just here to do the work, right? And I feel like we opened one junior level job. We got something like 700 applications. There is absolutely not a developer shortage right now.
Wow. That's very telling. That's actually very, very telling. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what the rest of this year bears out, as far as, because this can only go on for so long before everything starts to even out. But when that happens is anybody's guess at this point.
And I'm really curious to see what happens as it evens out. Like, Netlify made the call to not have an office anymore. We're going to set up co-working spaces in a spot called Spaces, actually, and have places where people can go be together if they want to work. But we don't have an office anymore. We don't have an expectation of co-location, even when things open fully up again. So I'm curious how many companies are going to do that, and what that's really going to mean for the way that companies function going into the next decade here.
I agree. And I think that there could be a whole college course or just a new career in creating, fully remote environments for happy employees. But Jason, thank you so much for having the conversation with me today about this. It's a very important issue, and it's not one that is going to be, hashed out in one afternoon. So I do appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll have you back another time to talk more about it as things progress.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, great. Thanks. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Inotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Inotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Inotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Inotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you, we have so many great webinars on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Too many for me to tell you about in this little preview, but here are 3 that are coming up very soon. So hopefully you'll be able to mark your calendar and join me. The first one is called the 7 Dimensions of Project to Product Transformation. This is happening Wednesday, May 4th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is sponsored by TaskTop. Shifting IT to a product operating model has never been more critical to bridging the crippling divide between technology and the business. The shift is a complex, multi-year effort that involves pervasive changes to people, process, and technology across 7 dimensions. So how can you ensure your transformation is moving in the right direction? This webinar offers up the 5 stages of project to product maturity and outlines the steps needed to advance to each stage in all 7 dimensions. It's going to be a good one. All right, the second one is called NSA Kubernetes Hardening Guide, What You Need to Know. This one is happening Thursday, May 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Fairwinds. The NSA has released a number of recommendations for hardening Kubernetes clusters. The guide outlines a strong defense in-depth approach to minimize the chances of a security breach and to ensure that if an attacker does infiltrate your Kubernetes cluster, the blast radius will be as small as possible. In this webinar, Robert Brennan and Andy Suderman, both from Fairwinds, will provide some information on the NSA Kubernetes Hardening Guide and provide some steps to achieve compliance with the NSA's recommendations. Another very, very insightful, very relevant webinar there. The third one is called Chaos Engineering for DevOps. This one is happening Tuesday, May 10th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Sumo Logic, partnered with AWS. DevOps is all about safe experimentation, failing fast, and continuous feedback loops. Chaos engineering is all about purposefully triggering a software failure in production to build confidence and resilience. So how can DevOps teams leverage chaos engineering to deliver better customer experiences? This webinar will cover how chaos engineering can uncover failure before it impacts customers, how to get all teams on board and comfortable with chaos, and using chaos engineering to train teams and improve individual, team, and technology performance. Another good one. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. I'll be back tomorrow with a whole new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Oh, the great pleasure of being joined by Jadal Damania. Am I saying that right, Jadal? Yes, I'll get it. I'll get that correctly before we're finished. Jadal is VP of Delivery with Contino. Super pleased that you're joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you. Great to be here.
Good, good. Would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and also tell us a little bit about Contino.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Jatil, as you mentioned, VP of Delivery at Contino. I've grown up in technology, a physics degree, and worked in high tech in my early years, and then moved into consulting. My focus is really around building high performing teams and helping them deliver products to customers faster through building really good software products. And that led me to my career at Contino as well, because Contino is a leading transformation consultancy, and we help large regulated companies really become more fast and agile and develop a customer-centric approach. And we do that through our engineering, through helping them develop really good engineering capabilities within their organizations and showing them how to use all of the technology that's available today to make their businesses improve.
I'd love to get into that too. I know we want to talk about cloud and cloud models, but I have a few questions to ask about the kind of tech transfer process, if you will. So, you've been doing this for a while. We've both been doing it for a while. Cloud's not new, but we've seen a rapid acceleration move to the cloud. Of course, that means multiple things. It doesn't mean, pick up everything and drop it into somebody else's data center. That's the cloud. Not anymore. There's lots of models. There's lots of ways of doing this. Tell us a little bit about some of the kind of current approaches that you see are being successful with people you and your team are out there living this and breathing this with the customers every day.
Yeah, I think you touched on a good point, right? Like cloud has been around for a while, like AWS, GCP, Azure, they've all grown incredibly and the services available are like exponentially increasing. What I've seen, especially in the last year or so, is that the model of adopting cloud is changing. There used to be a question of strategy from organizations that we want to be all in on the cloud, or like we want to be in cloud by 2022, or like those kind of dates. And primarily going in on one cloud as well. What we're seeing more of now is organizations moving to a thought process some organizations moving to a thought process of the right model for the right area, and more talk about potentially multi-cloud as well, which was a very difficult thing like 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? Whenever organizations used to try a multi-cloud, I worked on a multi-cloud project myself for a company. Like it was really hard to do back then, but like it's a lot more able now. So the ability for organizations to pick the right tools for the right services is becoming a lot more possible. We're not seeing all of the clients being like having that mature conversation yet, but there is definitely a trend towards that happening right now.
I just think another provider is just another platform or 3 times the work if we're going to go into 3 different platforms. I think you're right. There's strengths of each, and it's not just the top 3, right? There's kind of middle tiers, alternative cloud providers, all kinds of options today and services that go along with that. What do you see as some of the business drivers or the benefits that people are looking to achieve by moving to the cloud now? It used to be like, cost, or it just, I don't need to spend capital. I need to move to a more of a, cost put it in the ops bucket. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think had a few conversations in the last couple of weeks about how we moved to the cloud, and we're now seeing it costs more, right? And I think there's definitely, if people don't know, then they should definitely know that if you try and use cloud with the goal of it cutting costs, but not doing it correctly, then you might not get those rewards on it. Mm-hmm. You have to set it up correctly and use the services in the right way to make sure that the costs do come down. There are definitely the ability to do that, but the right focus and effort needs to be made on that. I think the key elements of sorry, I kind of deviated from the question a little bit, but the different models. Actually, shall we go back to the question itself?
Yeah, just talking about the benefits that what people are looking to achieve and how to achieve those things.
Yeah, so
just kind of the simple things we started with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry, we went off mind with the FinOps stuff. But yeah, I think the key goals that really do help is definitely the time to market, right? So being able to launch a new service or get multiple releases out there when you're moving at a very fast pace, which this industry needs more and more with competitors and new startups and all of those fun things in the industry, cloud really does allow you to move faster. Traditional data centers are still, because of the way they set up, as you mentioned, there's different providers, and the data centers that are starting to have cloud type services there as well. But the key goal is to make sure that the software team, the product team, can get an idea and get it into the customer's hands as soon as possible. So you should be able to do it in weeks and months. You shouldn't be doing these projects for months and years anymore. Mm-hmm. That's probably the biggest benefit, and also the ability to innovate on those services as well. So before, when you used to try and launch a new service, you had to create everything yourself within your data center. But now these cloud providers, and even through these innovators, you're able to pull different services and build it into your software, into your application, into your product. And that allows you to iterate your product a lot faster. So if you think about virtual stores, for example, right? Like you have different AI, ML type tools that allow you to model, be that like furniture in your room and things like that. Like you don't have to create all that technology yourself. You can leverage what other organizations use and connect it all up as well. So that capability just helps you work a lot more faster to get things to your customers.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the mistake of thinking about it as a different kind of data centers. It's not the full ecosystem of capabilities, technologies, innovations. Matter of fact, I'm thinking about, we mentioned the different models of how you use cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid, all of those. Are there some patterns or some business examples you think are good ones to look at for people that are considering what those options are?
Yeah. If you're starting, focusing on one cloud or one technology is definitely a good thing, because if you try and do too much, then it's really hard to get out of the starting blocks. As I said, I think the push towards multi-cloud, I think if you'd asked me like 12 months ago, should I do multi-cloud? I would have said no way. But now the capabilities are increasing there. I think it's a difficult thing to do, but almost making sure you're thinking about what the outcomes you're trying to drive, and then looking at what tools are there. And then again, one thing I always say people should avoid is the analysis paralysis. Mm-hmm. Almost come up with a hypothesis, cycle on it quickly. You should be able to do proof of concepts in 2 to 4 weeks, and then say yay or nay. Don't be scared to say, actually, that didn't work. Let's try a different route. And it's a bit nerve-wracking when you do it first, right? You think about, what about the controls? What about the governance and all of those things? But you can build all of those from a ground-up method really well nowadays as well. So that should be part of the build process, not a constraint or an afterthought anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a mind shift from plunking down hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars to build out, retool a data center, whatever it is, versus, hey, we can try this for weeks, months, whatever. If we're not happy with it, we can make a shift, or we can take different strategies, try those, iterate on it, prototype on it, take different apps, experiment, and you've got the option to pivot, shift, and, move much more quickly, which that's a whole different mindset. It's like buying a car based on having to build the factory. Well, I don't have to build the factory. It's like, I don't like this car, I'll sell and get the next one, right? It's a different mindset.
Yeah, definitely. And if you do it from the API driven mindset, that's very, very strong right now as well. It allows you to build things in a certain environment, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you can actually reuse some of that in different environments as well. So it's not any more throwaway work. You just move it and adapt it to the new technologies with the new approach as well. So it's becoming easier to do those kind of POCs as well.
Yeah, the API abstraction can also abstract some of the services you might use or whatever to be able to go across clouds. Now, as people are looking at multi-cloud, you mentioned in the last year or so, your thinking has shifted more positively towards doing that. Is that by kind of rethinking how you're using different cloud providers at the same time in a multi-cloud strategy, instead of trying to put the same app in multi-cloud and deal with the differences in that environment? Is it more focusing on how you manage apps across those different providers, or is it more the API things help us abstract so we can move the same app in multiple places?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things in my mind that's helped me make the shift from a mindset perspective as well. One is the API. It's definitely like the ability to abstract. And also the providers are making it a bit more easier to do that as well. And I think the other element was the biggest problem organizations face is the skills within their organization, right? It's really hard to be able to work on GCP and AWS or like all the other clouds. I keep focusing on the top three, or the other clouds that they may use, or the data center as well. And that leap used to be very big, but as the engineering community is becoming more cloud aware and getting more cloud skills, the ability to move across, like obviously there's going to be engineers that are very deep in certain clouds, but the ability to move across clouds and the barrier to that entry is getting less if you have the right mindset and the right team dynamics towards that as well. And so I think that's probably a big change as well. And I fully expect over the next 12 to 18 months, the tools to be able to manage across the clouds and do the FinOps across clouds and look at your consumption as well will start making that conversation a lot easier as well.
To your point, yeah, a lot of it comes from experience too. It's not rushing out and doing multi-cloud right at the beginning, learning the API strategy, learn, what it's like to manage both cost and technology across cloud providers. So I'm really interested in Contino and in this context, especially because I come from this consulting background a long time ago. But, there's lots of reasons why people use consulting companies. And sometimes it's just pure staffing. Other times it's expertise that we don't have. And oftentimes what always comes with it too is, well, what happens when they move on to the next project, either at my company or somewhere else? And I still don't have the staff, right? It's kind of a tech transfer. What are some of those considerations as you're working with customers that business leaders need to make as they decide this is the right partner for us to work with?
Yeah, I think one of the big trends that I'm a fan of that a lot of organizations are doing is that when the project is really important to the organization, they keep it close to their hearts. And so they really take ownership for delivering it. And when you're doing that, even if you're doing it in-house, you still want to bring in the expertise to help you accelerate that delivery. And that's really where we try and help organizations as well. So we have some really great product people, and we have some highly skilled engineers within Contino, and we focus on almost that kickoff startup, the early phase of projects where, hey, how do we get our heads around what we need to do? And really driving towards the proof of concept, MVP, initial things into production. But we do that in a way where we're working with the client. So we don't, majority of our projects, we're working hand in hand with the client team. So we have 3 or 4 people working within a Scrum team from the client. So there's the cross teaming, and that helps us to upskill the organizations as we're going, and to infuse in them the capabilities, the ideas, and the skills that we have. And so by the end of the engagement, they are fully capable to kind of drive the project to the next phase as well. And really instilling that learning, development, agile, and all of those cultural elements that really help the team focus on delivering really good software outcomes.
Yeah, I think something I've learned that I really relate to what you're saying is, because I brought in people to help us move to containers, then move to microservices, and also migration to cloud, is bringing in a partner that one of the objectives is to accelerate the learning, the upskilling of your team as part of the project. That's one of the goals of working with a partner, as opposed to outsourcing. Outsourcing, you just hand it out and let them do it, and that works for non-critical stuff, right?
Yeah, and there's definitely there's a need for both of those elements, right? So almost we work very closely with Cognizant, who acquired us recently as well, and Cognizant have the different types of services, and that really helps, right? If it's something that you need to do, you've got set patterns and set processes, then focus on things that are really going to make a difference to the business over the next 6, 12, 24 months. And almost offloading a project and taking it back on, it's really hard to make sure that works well. The thing that gets me excited about the work that we do is the fact that we work with the customers to achieve their vision as well, and giving them the skills and helping them with the ways of working that help them achieve over the longer term.
Wonderful. Well, it's been fascinating. Great talking with you, and look forward to hopefully I get to have some more conversations about this. I feel like there's a ton to learn from you. So thanks. How about where can folks learn more about some of the services that you offer, find out more about Contino? Feel free to hit me up as well. But we've got a Contino.io website as well. So lots of good information there. But highly approachable organization. Great. Well, thank you very much, Jatil. Very good to be talking with you, and look forward to next time we chat. Thank you. Nice to speak to you too.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we are back. Rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we've got The View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard speaks with Wes Wells, who is a product manager for Instant Connect, and Mark Hermeling, who is the vice president of global solutions engineering at Grammatech. They discuss how to dynamically generate a software bill of materials. Great conversation. It's a great topic as well, so let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Wes Wells, who's a product manager for Instant Connect, and he's joined by Mark Hermeling, who is vice president for global solutions engineering at Grammatech, and we're talking about S-bombs. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having us.
Wes, you guys decided to use Grammatech to generate S-bombs for a voice push-to-talk platform, as I understand it, that's used in military applications and other first responder type things. What led you down that path, and why is S-bombs becoming an issue for you today?
Well, we went down that path because, a lot of our customers, as you mentioned, our military customers in particular, information assurance is critical to them in order to get authority to operate and to use our applications on those secure networks. It is a requirement by their information assurance teams to have any application that's going to run on those secure networks to be scanned to call out any potential vulnerabilities or any of the third open source libraries that are used in that application to make sure that they're part of that SBOM, so that there are known commodities as to the libraries that are being used in that application and any potential vulnerabilities, that there may be in those applications as they run on those security networks. And that's, why, we reached out to Grammatech to, work with them to make sure that we can, have our application scanned actually before it goes to the customer, and we can provide that SBOM to them, when we're delivering our application to our customers.
Were you doing something before that looked like an SBOM, or is this the first time you're kind of going down that path? And does this have anything to do with the Biden administration order?
So we was not doing anything, as far as an SBOM previously. We would, of course, scan our software for potential vulnerabilities, but we did not provide any SBOM, to our customers unless they, requested a list of open source or third-party libraries that we was using in our application. Then we would provide that to them, but we never provided it up front.
Mark, are you seeing more organizations come to you looking for an SBOM capability that's tied into some sort of code analysis? What's driving this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of customers coming to us right now saying, hey, and definitely from two different angles. One angle is like Wes at Instant Connect saying, hey, we have this application that we're building. We need to provide this to customers like the DoD, or maybe critical infrastructure customers, or maybe medical customers like the FDA, where some form of software bill of material is a requirement to go with the deliverable. So they're looking for tools and say, how can we automate this SBOM creation? And you have to keep in mind that if you have a small application, an SBOM is simple. But if you have a big application with lots of libraries that you bring in from third parties, a ton of open source that you link in, the question is always, like, what is in this final product? What is in this final binary that I ship out? So customers are struggling in that aspect, especially if you have, let's say, a large medical company with maybe hundreds of projects, some old, some new. And then at the other side, software companies that are consuming software, right? So maybe it's a large enterprise that is bringing in software from maybe hundreds, maybe 200, 300 vendors across everything from like desktop to mobile. And they don't necessarily know what's in it. And that's a big blind spot, if you wish, in their cybersecurity frameworks. They know what they built themselves, but they don't necessarily know. They have no way of kind of validating the software that they bring in. And that leaves them open for kind of the Log4j type of vulnerabilities, where there is some piece of open source componentry in the software that they use that they were not aware of. And then they're scrambling to figure out what their response is.
Wes, how did you land on Grammatech? There's a lot of people out there talking about automating SBOMs lately. So what's your sense of why this one versus any other one?
We landed on Grammatech actually because one of our DoD customers did a scan using the Grammatech's Code Sentry product, and came back to us with a couple of findings that they wanted us to address. And so then I reached out to Grammatech to get their assistance on what those vulnerability findings were and what they felt was the best mitigation and a path forward based upon their scan report on the mitigation practices for those vulnerabilities. And since I reached out to them, they've been very helpful on building this relationship with us and providing best support for our customers.
Mark, do you think as we go along that as people go build out these SBOMs that they're going to discover more issues, more vulnerabilities and things in their code that they pretty much didn't think about up until somebody told them they needed an SBOM?
Yeah, we see this all the time with the customers that we're working with. Some customers are very new to the topic, right? And you provide them with an initial scan and they go, we had not expected instant component name to be in our software. Other customers are sometimes a bit more, advanced in the topic. They may already have an SBOM, but they struggle sometimes with version numbers. So we've seen with one particular medical customer that provided us with a sample binary, and they were a major revision off on one of the components in their SBOM. So people are struggling with this, right? It's hard to see what's in that final binary unless you have a tool like CodeSentry, which can give you that comfort, that determinism of, okay, now I'm actually looking at the final software product as opposed to looking at the input into your software build processes, CI/CD, containers, and all those type of things. CodeSentry takes that software, that final software that runs in the hands of your end users, and computes the SBOM on top of that, which is just a tremendous capability to have for many customers.
Mark, who's leading the charge on this? I mean, we hear about shift left all the time, but is it the actual developers who are doing that, or is it more the DevOps platform people who are integrating tools inside the workflow? Because the developer may not have the time or the expertise to know what a security issue is. So where is that shift left leaning toward exactly?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's two different aspects that come to mind. So the idea with DevSecOps, of course, is to give developers enough capabilities that they can solve security issues early on. But typically what you're talking about there is security issues in the code that they're writing, right? Because you want developers to think of the feature that they are responsible for, and whether that's a GUI widget or some signal processing content, or networking content, you really want their minds focused on delivering that capability. And then you have programming problems such as buffer overruns and underruns and null pointer dereference. And you want to kind of help them with that, but in their own context. That's all what DevSecOps is about. But then if you take a step back and say, do you really want every single developer kind of caring about what libraries he links in? That's usually some other level of part in the team, and either that's an integrator or that's a security person. And CodeSentry really fits into that role by not bothering the individual developer, but helping the person that builds that entire structure of all these linked libraries and which ones to select, and help them at that level. So yes, it's in DevSecOps, but not necessarily every single software developer, if that makes any sense.
It does. Is it going to get harder or easier to maintain an SBOM? Because when I look around, I see all these microservices and containers, and there's a lot of ripping and replacing of components. So how do I know what's where and when, and how do I know that my SBOM is current?
Yeah, it's an exciting world out there for sure. Is it going to be easier? I think it will be as companies get more and more mature. So right now it's a little bit of a wild west out there because, and we ask this question to our customers and our partners on a regular basis, saying, do you provide an SBOM to your end customer? And the typical answer is no, unless they ask pointy questions. But as the industry matures and SBOMs are being provided, now it goes from a discovery to a verification effort, right? As opposed to saying, hey, here's a binary, what can I find? It becomes here's a binary, hey, can I compare the output of that binary against the input of the SBOMs of all of my vendors, which will be easier for sure.
Yeah. Wes, what do you know now that you wish you knew 3 or 4 months ago when you probably first started thinking about all this stuff? But what's your best advice to some folks and save them some time and agony?
I think the best advice is the practice that we've taken is to have our scans done on each of our different software releases, and that way we have that current SBOM for that release that we can provide to our customers at the time that we deliver the software to them. It also gives us an advantage because now we know of any vulnerabilities up front before we ever release our software to our customers. And then our customers can be assured that we've done our due diligence to, make sure that we've found any vulnerabilities and mitigated any vulnerabilities before our software ever goes out the door.
All right. Hey, Mark, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. Will AI save us from ourselves, or is that just asking too much right now?
Ooh, that's a whole different ball of wax, isn't it? AI is interesting. I typically start with machine learning, and let's try to help our computers learn a little bit from the stuff that we're doing. And we certainly use it in our software quite a bit, but it's at a very simplistic level. It certainly is not the Terminator type of artificial intelligence that people may be thinking of. In the end, we need to get better at having computers understand us, right? If you think of programming as an activity, that's advancing significantly. You brought up microservices. Solving small different pieces of microservices is much easier than doing it in big monolithic applications. Well, if you take AI in that context and say, hey, is there a particular piece of that distributed application where I can solve a microservice with AI, that's much easier to do than big complex monoliths, right? So I'm excited for the topic for sure. A lot of our customers deal as well in automotive, right? And if you think of self-driving cars, that's a tremendous area for artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Wes, what's your wish list there? What do you want Mark to work on next for you? What's at the top of your list?
I think just to keep providing the service that they are providing for us, because that's really what gives us the comfort and providing the best software for our customers is being able to do these scans and, like I say, address any vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities up front, and also to keep looking forward as different versions of libraries come out, to make sure that we can address, any usage of those new libraries as they do become available.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you for stopping by and sharing your knowledge and insights.
Thank you very much.
All
right.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All right. And back to you guys in the studio.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, we are back, and that rounds out today's Techstrong TV broadcast. I hope everybody enjoyed today's presentations and conversations as much as I always enjoy bringing them to you. Just a quick reminder, next week we've got InnoTech Dallas coming up. We just got back from Austin. Now we're going to head on out to Dallas. So nice, we're going to do it twice, folks. It's going to be a great day. It's happening May 11th. Do highly encourage you, if you are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, please do stop by and join us. It is a one-day, all-day event, live in person. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers during the event, and so you can go to innotechdallas.com, check out the agenda, check out the speaker lineup, and register. I will be there live streaming, as I did with Austin last week. I think I'm also moderating a panel, so I will be certainly roaming the halls here and there, so I hope I do see you there. If you see me, stop me and say hello. And if you can join us in Dallas, do check out the live stream, and also certain sessions that occur during InnoTech Dallas, we are going to be recording and having on the Best of InnoTech virtual event happening later this year. But that is it for now. I'll be back tomorrow with a brand new Techstrong TV broadcast for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.